Sharm el-Sheikh, on the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula, a popular tourist destination for holidaymakers from around the world. In 1967, Israel captured Sharm el-Sheikh and the rest of the Sinai from Egypt in the Six-Day War. The Israeli government encouraged its citizens to settle in the Sinai. Natan Zehavi remembers the first time he set eyes on the area back in 1975.
Somebody gave me a plane ticket and said, "Come and see the most beautiful place in this country." I hadn't been there before. I flew over, and from the plane I saw the sea, the clear water. And I saw that there were no houses, no cars, no chimneys, no antennae. And I said, this is what I've been dreaming of. Here is where I want to live.
Sinai had always been a remote place, far from the heavily populated Nile Valley. Under Israeli control, the Sinai south coast was developed and transformed into a tourist destination.
The Israelis had built this hotel in Nueva, the other in Dahab. The third hotel was built in Sharm el-Sheikh. Very simple, very crude buildings, but they built them.
Today, Natan Zehavi lives in Tel Aviv, where he's a popular radio presenter. Back in 1982, after having lived in Sharm el-Sheikh for 7 years, he came to terms with the need to leave his home.
For me, the price of that peace was that I had to hand over the keys to my house that I loved so much. I said I was willing to give it all up, because it was worth it if there was to be no more war with Egypt. If no more Egyptians and Israelis were killed and there were embassies, we could visit the pyramids and they could visit us. Then it was worth it.
Egypt began to develop what the Israelis had started, building hotels and resorts in the Sinai. Tourism was regarded as a vital industry, promoting economic prosperity. Moreover, the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt had stipulated the free movement of citizens between the two countries as a means to develop good neighborly relations.
According to the peace treaty, Israelis were able to go into the Sinai as far as Sharm el-Sheikh for 7 days without a prior visa. In return, Egyptians were allowed to cross the borders from Taba into Eilat all the way to Beersheba for 7 days without a prior visa.
Trips to Egypt proved highly popular among Israelis. Many sought to travel beyond the Sinai. Long queues of Israelis seeking visas to visit Cairo formed outside the Egyptian embassy in Tel Aviv. In the first 2 years of the embassy opening, some 80,000 Israelis applied for Egyptian visas. Daily flights were laid on between Cairo and Tel Aviv, and buses began running each day between the two cities.
Why did you come to Egypt?
We like to see it. Since we made peace with them, we want to see them. We want to be friendly with them, to see us, to be together.
I remember that we started receiving about 30 buses every day, carrying about 1,000 to 1,500 passengers, especially via the Rafah border crossing. The majority of these tourists used to like going to visit the Jewish synagogue in downtown Cairo. Others liked to visit the places where the Jewish community had once lived in Cairo, since many of them used to live there or had relatives who had lived there.
A Jewish community had once flourished in Egypt. But many Jews had left when the State of Israel was established and the Arab-Israeli conflict began in 1948. Born in Cairo in the 1930s, Ada Aharoni today lives in Haifa in northern Israel. With peace between Egypt and Israel, Aharoni sought to track down her childhood friend Kadria from her school days in Cairo. Being a poet, she wrote about the memories she once shared with Kadria.
From Haifa to near faraway Cairo, I recall the velvet sugarcane juice we drank together, with the smooth blue air under the open skies, The sunflower seeds we cracked together with jokes, echoing laughter in the sun. How sweet the roasted potatoes were in those rainbow days.
Aharoni published her poem in the hope her school friend would read it.
Many years ago, a British woman called me and she said, I am Kadria's friend, and she has read your open letter and your poem, and she loves everything you wrote and read everything you wrote, but she's afraid to get in touch with you, not to be thought as a spy or... But one day when we will have full peace, she will come and visit you.
But full peace seemed a distant prospect. In October 1985, Israeli fighter planes bombed the PLO headquarters in Tunisia. Once again, the Arab world responded with outrage at Israel's military action. A few days later, an Egyptian soldier called Suleiman Khater opened fire on a group of Israeli tourists near Taba in Sinai. 10 Israelis were killed. The Egyptian authorities sought to downplay the incident, claiming Khater was a lone gunman who was mentally disturbed.
There's nothing at all.
But Mr. President...
The man who lost his mind he could do it anywhere.
Khater was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Egyptians took to the streets to show their support for him and to denounce their government. Meanwhile, relatives of the victims were not convinced the Egyptian court had ruled correctly.
I'm sure the justice was not done because you say it's 25 years, but it can be lessened if you for good behavior and so on, and I'm sure he won't be there 25 years. I think that Khater, Suleiman, should have gotten the maximum punishment in Egypt. I know in Egypt it's death.
In January 1986, Egyptian authorities announced Khater had committed suicide in his prison cell. Many Egyptians were skeptical about the government's version of events. Further attacks on Israeli tourists took place, as militants in Egypt identified tourists as a soft target by which to strike at Israel.
It is a shock to the peace, it is a shock to the relations. Yet, I'm determined that the peace momentum will not be handed over
Do you think
to terroristic groups. They will not decide if we are going to have peace or not.
Fearful of visiting Cairo, many Israeli holidaymakers decided to venture no further than the resorts of nearby Sinai. But in October 2004, a huge bomb exploded at the Hilton Hotel in Taba, a few hundred meters from the Israeli border. Over 30 people were killed and over 170 injured. Most were Israeli tourists celebrating the Jewish New Year. In the years following the signing of the peace treaty, Israeli tourists to Egypt far outnumbered Egyptians visiting Israel.
We didn't see any movement in the opposite direction. We didn't get a sense that there were many Egyptians going to Israel. We haven't heard of any tourist agency or any other type of agency planning tourist trips to Israel.
We know that many Egyptians wanted to come, but they were difficult. Israel is expensive for the ordinary man in the street in Egypt, but also the authorities. They interrogated every person who wanted to go to Israel or interrogated him after his return from Israel. And not many people in Egypt want really to have close relationship with the security organizations. So many of them said, well, why should I really risk being on the list of the security organizations just for a touristic visit to Israel?
Today, the flights between Cairo and Tel Aviv are still running, but there are few travelers. And here at the Taba border crossing between Egypt and Israel, there is little movement from one side to the other. The lack of travellers here highlights how tourism in the area has dropped. The peace still holds, but the good neighbourly relations cited in the treaty have not been realised.
The peace is called because it was signed between governments and not between the people. Someone decided to make peace, the other side agreed. And it was all done in the absence of any popular will. Governments or leaders cannot make peace without the will of the people.